We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
Bill Gates is one of the world's richest men. Born in Seattle in the northwest of the United States in 1955, he began to show an interest in computers while at high school. At 15, with his friend Paul Allen, he developed a computer program which monitored road traffic patterns. He sold it for $20,000. He went to Harvard University, initially planning a law career, but he dropped out when he and Allen designed a program for a new personal computer. It was 1975, and Microsoft was born. Over the next 30 years, through a combination of technical innovation and aggressive business tactics, Gates' firm became one of the best-known brands in the world, a leader in the software business. It's estimated around 80% of computers use Microsoft Windows. In 1986, Bill Gates started selling shares in his company, becoming an instant millionaire. He was just 31. The company quickly grew in value, and in just over a year, Gates was a billionaire. He first met Microsoft executive Melinda French in 1989. The pair married 5 years later. The same year, the William H. Gates Foundation was created, dedicating to supporting education. In 2000, the couple combined several family charities and formed the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, starting with their own $28 billion contribution. The foundation took more of Bill Gates' time, so in 2006 he announced he was leaving his full-time post at Microsoft to devote himself to his charity work. His last full day was June 27, 2008. He remains chairman of the board. The foundation concentrates its efforts in health, education and agriculture in both the developing and the developed world. Inevitably, it draws criticism about what it does and how it does it. Yet each year, it spends billions of dollars trying to live up to its mission to help all people lead healthy and productive lives.
Bill and Melinda Gates, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Mr. Gates, you were at the forefront of technological development. You created a brand that's known around the world. You made a personal fortune, changed the lives of millions of people with your innovations. Do you miss it?
Well, I'm still part-time involved at Microsoft, and those digital breakthroughs continue to do exciting things. And now our foundation tries to take that and make sure that the poorest benefit as well, whether it's by being educated or having the latest medicines.
Why did you decide, along with Melinda, to create and start the foundation?
Well, we talked ever since we met about how the great success of Microsoft should go back to the world and how we wanted to work together and find the most impactful way to do that. And so we had the foundation now for over 10 years and been very lucky to get some great people in and learned a lot, picked some causes to focus on, and I'm very excited about the impact we're having.
How much did you have to push Bill to get involved in the foundation? Because he was so deeply involved with Microsoft, and it was, to a large degree, all-consuming.
Oh, it wasn't a push at all with the foundation. I mean, these issues, you don't form a foundation without having these issues already close to heart. So the belief that we had that all lives have equal value, the more we both started to learn, and yes, sometimes I was traveling a little bit more than he was to the developing world because he'd take a Microsoft trip to India but not get time in the slums. But as much as I was getting a little bit more time to travel, he was reading immensely about these issues. And as he would read, he would inform me, and I would learn from that. As I was traveling, I'd inform him about that, and he'd learn and read. And so it was this constant learning journey for us. And even when there were only small amounts of time for the foundation from Bill, he was giving a lot of time at home and reading a lot because he was so curious and interested. And we were both so interested in how innovation could really change things for the lives of the poor. So his curiosity just meant that, you know, he was always learning about this, even when he was full-time at Microsoft.
So how do you make the decision what gets your initial attention and what then becomes a priority on an ongoing basis?
Well, when you start with the premise that all lives have equal value, you go and look at the disparities. You know, why do poor children die at a very high rate? What's missing? You know, why hasn't a malaria vaccine been created? Why aren't the right tools available to those mothers? And so we found out about the diseases and the lack of research and the lack of funding and picked those as a primary focus for us. Now, between global health, agriculture and some other related things, along with education, particularly in the United States, we feel like we've targeted the top priorities. We're going to stay focused on those so that we can have a big impact.
Do you think you made the right decision when you set out your first priorities for the foundation?
I think we did, and I think the way to know that we did is that the two first things that we picked were in the area of birth control, contraceptives, and also vaccines. And for some internal reasons, we focused actually, even though we first were looking at birth control, we focused first on vaccines and felt like we could get really good at that. And we've been at the vaccine work now, as Bill said, for over a decade. So when you see that, over 5 million lives have been saved from vaccines, we took our initial investment and it went so well, we actually doubled down on that and then moved even further and richer into vaccines. And then we've now gone back to the contraceptive piece, saying we still absolutely believe it, and now is the time to really hit it on this family planning or the contraceptives piece. And so we feel very good about both of those initial investments in areas that we had looked at, and then feeling that we could add on some things, as Bill described, like agriculture, which is after family begins to lift themselves up and have basic health, then of course they need to be able to feed themselves. So being able to add on the agricultural piece, particularly because of the investment that our friend Warren Buffett made in the foundation, we feel great about that.
A lot of the projects are run in a joint partnership with private enterprise. What attracts you to that model for bringing benefits to places like Africa and India and elsewhere?
Well, the biggest things we've done have to do with delivery, and that's mostly partnered with governments who are taking their aid budgets and spending them very effectively on these health and agriculture interventions. It's more up on the invention side that we find private companies often who are willing to invest alongside us. Sometimes we have to create new entities, sometimes it's spun out of academia, but when, for example, the vaccine companies are willing to take something, bring the price down dramatically, or lend us their best scientists, that's often where we've had the most breakthroughs.
Does that create a conflict of interest, though?
Well, the work they're doing is pro bono, helping out the poorest who they know aren't a big market. And they always feel that they want to do that, and yet their financial constraints don't let them. So as we come in and take on some of those costs, it lets them have their scientists work on saving lives, which is really what their mission is.
Does the Gates name then buy you access and influence when you're dealing with these companies and also with individual governments as well?
I think one of the things that we've been able to do with the foundation is because people see that we're actually having real impact, that we've been able to help with our partners. Take something like a vaccine. When we first got into this work, it took 30 years from when a vaccine would come out in the United States or in the UK till it got to the developing world. And oftentimes it wouldn't even have the right strains for what was needed in the vaccine for the developing world. In the last few years, that time horizon has come down to less than a year. So one of the biggest childhood killers, which is pneumonia, there's now a new pneumonia vaccine that takes less than a year to come out in the US, but also come out now with the right strains, for instance, in Kenya. When people see that you can actually are making change and that these childhood deaths are coming down, there used to be 20 million children that died a year right around the time I was born in the 1960s. Now that number is down to less than 8 million deaths a year. That's because of what has happened in vaccines. And so I think it's the impact when people see the foundation actually is not only serious about change, but can make change with our partners, then they're interested in investing with us in other areas. And I think that's where you get the credibility from.
Does polio remain the overriding objective when it comes to vaccination programs for the Gates Foundation?
It's a top priority for us, and I'm excited that we can see that with good work, we're only years away from getting it done. It's down to 3 countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan and Asia, and Nigeria and Africa. And we're spending a lot of time making sure that funds are there, the new tactics are there to get better coverage. And this will become the second disease after smallpox that's ever been eradicated.
Once polio is eradicated, if it is, what do you then turn your attentions to? What's next?
Well, in parallel, we're doing a lot of new vaccines. That's the only really big disease eradication. Guinea worm is close to eradication as well, although that never had as broad an impact. If you look out in the 10 to 20 year time frame, there are a few other diseases like HIV and malaria that the world would love to get rid of. We need a lot better tools, and so in the near term, it's much more cutting down the number of deaths on those, but we invest in models and work, and the dream is eradication. In our lifetime, I think we'll see several more eradications.
I read in preparation for this interview that Melinda tends to deal much more with the here and now, and you're much more the long-term visionary. Is that a fair characteristic of the dynamic of the partnership?
No, I don't think it's easy to partition it that way. I mean, you know, we're both pretty hands-on in terms of getting out in the field and seeing what's happening, meeting with partners, energizing partners. You know, sometimes one of us will get more into the science in a particular area than the other one, but we're pretty common in what we focus on.
And I think you have to take any given area and realize that they're absolutely every day here and now. So polio, which Bill is spending particularly a lot of time on, I mean, the here and now is right now. I mean, he knows the cases in northern Nigeria, in the villages. You know, he's looking up the statistics every single week and meeting with the team often about the here and now, but at the same time focused on the long term of how are we going to get the eradication and do we need to change the tools. The same would be true of family planning, which I'm deeply involved in, which is there's the here and now of what's going on in the ground, but also I want to make sure we have new tools for women that are longer lasting, longer acting, and that's a long, broad horizon. So I think one of the benefits that we both have in this work is that on any topic area, we're both always trying to take the long-term view, but very involved now in how do you get the work done today and have impact today.
You mentioned the family planning issue, and you yourself are a Christian, a practicing Catholic, yet you've offended your own church by pushing this issue. Was that something that you thought long and hard about, or was it something that seemed pretty obvious to you?
It's something that I certainly wrestled with personally because I grew up Catholic. I am still a practicing Catholic. But you can't do the work that I do and not go out in the developing world as many times as I've talked to women in Niger and Senegal and Bangladesh and in India and have them asking me, not me asking them, but them asking me over and over. I'll go in to talk to them about a vaccine for their child and they'd say, but what about that shot I used to get for family planning? What happened to that injection? I can't get it anymore and I can't plan my family. And this almost outcry that I was hearing in the developing world, you have to say, I had to speak out and do something because it makes such a difference in their life. It is literally a matter of life and death for these women. So it was worth me wrestling with that issue personally and then taking a strong stance because somebody needs to give voice to those women. And ultimately, I feel like that's something the foundation can do.
Let me read you what the Vatican newspaper said about you, and I'm sure you've heard this before. You are a victim of bad information and persistent stereotypes. To believe by opposing the use of condoms, the Catholic Church leaves women and children to die because of misogynist intransigence is a baseless and shoddy reading.
I don't think that I'm misinformed on this issue. So I think, you know, we're coming at it from slightly different points of view, and I think sometimes the press overplays that. I do know what the Vatican has written about this as well. But the Church believes in natural family planning, and I think there's a role and a place for that. I've actually seen people in the developing world absolutely use natural family planning. I also think there's a role in the world for modern contraceptives. I think they have the broadest impact, and I think we can both do our work in harmony together. I don't think it has to be an either or, but from the Foundation's point of view, I'm all about how do you make sure that women have the options to decide what it is that they want to do, how they want to space and plan their births so they can save their lives and their children's lives. And for me, having the greatest impact means modern tools, tools we use in places like the UK or the US or Japan. And I think all women should have access to those, no matter where they live.
Is there a worry on the Foundation's part when Melinda raises issues like this, that you're getting involved in something that is highly politicized?
Well, giving women the tools they need speaks to our basic mission. I don't think it's that political. You know, even overwhelming percentage of Catholics are using modern contraception tools. There are other issues that we've chosen to stay away from that are more controversial, but this one I don't think it is. I don't think vaccines are controversial. You know, we're trying to deal with basic human needs.
And I think another thing is we shouldn't shy away as a world from doing things because we've made them difficult. Yes, contraceptive has had some tricky times in the past. Absolutely, some not great things happened in Peru and in our own country and in India and other places. But it means that we stepped back from it as a world, and yet we're letting women die because they can't space their children. So the women that I meet in the developing world, some of these women are 16 and 17 years old, having babies multiple time after time. When you talk to families in Niger and Senegal, where I just was in July, they all know somebody that's died in childbirth, a sister, a mother, an aunt. It is a life and death crisis. And so just because something is difficult politically doesn't mean we should back away from it. We should do the right thing to save these women's lives and the babies' lives.
Is there a concern that in this issue and in others that involves the foundation, that you're taking a view which is very much centred in the Northern Hemisphere, in the Western world, rather than taking account of many of the local cultural issues?
We think the death of a child is a fairly global human thing. Certainly the parents everywhere we've ever been, they view that as an incredible tragedy. And so I think if we don't take human knowledge and use it on behalf of these people, that's where we're creating a divide that should not exist. We have enough food to eat. We have children who survive. Those things should be pretty basic. And yet the priorities of the world were not focused on a malaria vaccine. Now we're trying to change that. We're getting vaccines that were more needed by poor kids, but were restricted to use only by rich kids. Now we're getting them out to everyone. So it's very much about equity for universal values.
And when you go into a country, you have to absolutely work with the government, work with civil society, work with the private sector on the ground in a culturally appropriate way. So a great example again in Niger, they're starting there with a husband's school, training the husbands about family planning, the husbands about vaccination, because they hold the power in those cultures. And then alongside that, they're starting to talk with the women. The men are allowing that. We're also working in many, many places with the Muslim leadership, because the Muslim leadership is helping us with polio vaccines in northern Nigeria. They're also saying to us the Quran allows for family planning, and we need to do a better job of getting the message out to our whole Muslim organization so it does go all the way down to the village level. But everything we do, when you bring in a piece of knowledge or a vaccine technology from the West, has to be done in a culturally appropriate and sensitive way, and we work through the governments to do that.
Do you get concerned or worried or even frustrated when anytime you try and introduce a new initiative, it seems to draw criticism from one sector or another, that you're involving the private sector, you're not considering local issues enough, you're upsetting religions? Is there ever a time where you think this isn't worth it?
Well, the thing that concerns us the most is that the needs of the poorest don't have enough visibility. And so whenever we come out with a new vaccine, you almost need controversy to get people to be reminded the way they live is not the way that billions live. And where most children are born is in the poor countries. And so anytime we can take people there, show them the conditions, and have them think, okay, how can we make that better, and understand that progress is being made, that's wonderful. So it's the lack of interest is where we're most disappointed.
Bill's talked about the use of capitalism, and you yourself have said that maybe NGOs, government organisations, can learn from private industry when it comes to distributing aid. Do you still believe that that's a model that is feasible and workable?
Well, I think both learn from each other, and the best models I have seen are where the NGOs and the private sector are working together. So I'll give you a concrete example. In Zambia, which was one of the first countries to really put bed nets in at a very large scale for malaria, when we understood they would really start to make a difference in malaria. The NGOs went in and were trying to get people to accept not only bed nets, but spraying their homes. It's not a popular thing to have your home sprayed, but it helps with mosquitoes. They were having great success in the nets, but not in the spraying. Turned out the mining companies, though, who were also doing the exact same thing with their employees around the mining companies, the copper mines, had figured out incentives to get people to have their homes sprayed. And so as soon as the NGO and the private sector came together and started to realize where the bottlenecks were in the system about getting nets out, where the incentives weren't quite right, they were learning from each other. And immediately NGOs said, oh, we're going to adopt that same model. That's exactly how you want these things to work in countries. You want them to be learning from one another and from the governments and civil society around them. It's when they come together in country that you get the best outputs.
A lot of this is about education, and education is something that you invest in the United States. Why do that? Was that to protect yourself from accusations that your attention is everywhere but the place where you made your millions?
Well, both Melinda and I benefited from having a great education, and there's nothing more important to the future of America, both at the individual and the country level, than renewing our investments in education and getting it to be the best in the world. There's some great opportunities with using online tools as part of the educational process. We're funding some great innovators there. There's the possibility of helping teachers understand what they're doing that's working, what's not working, reinforce the best practices, and so it's another exciting area. It might be one of the most difficult areas we're working in, but whatever does work, we'll hope not only will we fund it in the U.S., but it'll have an impact on a global basis.
Have you found that the opposition to some of the suggestions you've made in education have received, it has been much stronger here than it has been in perhaps in Africa and Asia when you've initiated projects there?
Well, I think it's hard to compare and contrast criticism that you get in places. Look, criticism at the end of the day actually helps you and helps you fine-tune where you are and what you're trying to do. And what I'll say about this is we're trying to do something very difficult in the United States, which is to change a system, to make sure that there's a system that ensures a great teacher is in front of every kid in the classroom. And that's hard to do with the system as it exists today, and systems change is hard. So when you try to change things and when you try to make sure that we really have a real evaluation system for teachers and that they are really trying to get the coaching and the development they need, that's going to create angst. It's going to, naturally. And so I think we have a period here where you're going to hear a lot of criticism as the change happens. But some of the schools that we've been in where the change is already starting to take hold, they'll tell you the angst is there for 2 years, but once the teachers start to see the real benefits of the change and they see the professional development and they see the coaching, they become champions of it. So we have to get over this initial momentum and wave, and so you're going to hear a lot of criticism the next 2, 3, 4 years. That's okay. Systems change is hard.
Should more people like you, very, very wealthy individuals, step up and do more? I know Warren Buffett's involved in the foundation, but should there be others who do what you do?
Well, I wouldn't say should, in the sense that people do have freedom in terms of how they spend their wealth. I think if they chose to, they would enjoy it, they'd be more fulfilled, they'd be able to have a wonderful impact. And so anyone who's curious about philanthropy worldwide, particularly those who've been very successful, we've been reaching out to, sitting down, talking to. Obviously, they'll pick their own things to be involved in. But yeah, we hope to share with them that we're enjoying it and we'd love to have more and more involved.
I asked people on Twitter if they had a question that would ask either of you, and apart from various questions about Windows Vista and what's it like to be Bill Gates, one question I got was, with all your philanthropic goodwill, do you ever despair about your inability to really fix the world?
Well, it takes time to improve things. We talk about being impatient optimists. We believe it can be changed, and we see just in the decade we've been in this a massive amount of change, a lot of great partnerships. And, we wake up and think, could we do this thing faster? Why is this so complicated? Why is drug approval complicated? Why is getting the delivery system in these countries, why is that complicated? So we try and push it forward, but we have a realistic view. We'll be able to get quite a bit done in the decades ahead, and so it feels good, even though we're pushing as hard as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Final word?
Just that I would say, as we've traveled for the last decade on the foundation, you can stand back sometimes and it sounds like maybe despair, even from the question on Twitter, but when you go out and travel in the developing world, there is so much hope and so much ingenuity. And I think that is also what keeps us at it. When you meet these families who are eking it out on a tiny farm and putting their kids in school, and you see that if you just give them one more input, it unlocks that family's potential. we see huge changes happening in Africa, and we see huge changes happening in childhood deaths because of vaccines. So for us, it gives us incredible hope about the changes that will even come in our lifetime, and it makes it a lot of fun to do this work, and we certainly enjoy doing it together. It's quite a journey for us.
Bill and Melinda Gates, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.